My name is Sophia Brown, and I was the same age I am now when my life split cleanly down the middle. Not with a scream, not with a confrontation, but with a 3-minute phone call I took during my lunch break. I remember because I was sitting alone in my car, the steering wheel still warm under my palms, a half-eaten sandwich sweating in its wrapper on the passenger seat. I had exactly 27 minutes before I had to go back inside. When my phone rang, I smiled. I shouldn't have. It was my boyfriend. 5 years together. 5 years of shared routines, shared plans, shared futures, spoken casually like facts. He was supposed to be at work. I figured he was calling to complain about his boss or ask what we were doing for dinner. Instead, his voice sounded distant, controlled, like he had rehearsed this. "Sophia," he said, and my stomach tightened at the way he used my name. "I don't think this is working anymore." I laughed softly, because that's what you do when your brain refuses to accept what it's hearing. "What do you mean?" I asked. He sighed, a practiced sigh. "I've fallen out of love." That was it. No fight, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the 5 years we had built together. Just a statement. Clean, clinical, irreversible. I asked if there was someone else. He didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything. By the time the call ended, my lunch break was over. My hands were shaking, my mouth tasted like metal, and I walked back into my office pretending I hadn't just been erased from my own life. A week later, I saw the photo. It was posted publicly, no shame, no hesitation. My now ex-boyfriend was standing beside his ex-girlfriend, the same woman I had been told not to worry about years ago. They were kissing, smiling like teenagers, the caption reading, "Sometimes what you're looking for is right in front of you." I stared at the screen until it blurred. This wasn't just betrayal, it was replacement. I packed his things that night, carefully, methodically, and left the boxes on his parents' porch. I blocked both of them on everything. Social media, text, calls. Our mutual friends tried to stay neutral. They offered condolences with careful wording, like they were afraid grief was contagious. That hurt almost as much as the breakup. Then came the message from him. A long, rambling text about feelings he couldn't fight, and how he hoped someday we could still be friends. I never replied. Silence was the only boundary I had left. At least that's what I thought. Because about a month later, I logged into our joint savings account, the one meant for our future, and learned that heartbreak, apparently, could be quantified. And it cost a lot more than my pride. I didn't check our joint savings account right away. Not because I didn't care, because I cared too much. That account was more than numbers on a screen. It was proof that the last 5 years had meant something. Rent split down the middle. Groceries bought on Sunday mornings. Little sacrifices that didn't feel like sacrifices because we were building toward a house, toward stability, toward ours. We called it our future fund. High-yield savings. Automatic transfers every payday. A boring adult thing that, somehow, felt romantic. So for weeks after the breakup, I avoided it the way you avoid a street where something terrible happened. I told myself I'd deal with it when I stopped waking up with that hollow ache behind my ribs. But one night, after work, I opened my laptop and thought, at least I can separate our money. At least I can salvage something. I logged in, clicked into the account, and my body went cold. The balance was $12.38. I blinked like the screen might correct itself. It didn't. I refreshed. Once, twice, 3 times. Still $12.38. My throat tightened. My fingers went numb as I clicked transaction history, a part of my brain already screaming the truth before my eyes confirmed it. 2 days after the breakup call, 2 days, the entire balance had been transferred out. $50,040 gone in a single clean sweep. And the transfer was initiated by his ex-girlfriend. I stared at her name in the transaction record until it became something unreal, like a character in a nightmare. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. Then came the humiliation, hot, sharp, nauseating. Because I had put more into that account than he had. I knew it. I'd done the math years ago when we were talking about down payment percentages, about neighborhoods, about what kind of yard we wanted. I had contributed the lion's share, around 70% of it, a little over $35,000-ish. My money, my future, my trust. And suddenly, I wasn't just the woman who'd been dumped. I was the woman who'd been robbed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call him and unleash every ugly word in my throat. But something inside me, something hard and quiet, rose up like a wall. No. If I called, they'd get emotion. If I begged, they'd get power. So I did the one thing they wouldn't expect. I took a screenshot, then another. I zoomed in on the date, the amount, her name. Cold proof. This wasn't a breakup. It was a heist. And it wasn't impulsive, not with that timing, not with that precision. My hands still shaking, I searched for attorneys. I didn't want a loud one. I didn't want a dramatic one. I wanted someone who understood that cruelty sometimes hides behind polite smiles and legal loopholes. I found her the next morning. Her name was Ms. Gable. Sharp eyes, calm voice. The kind of woman who didn't waste words because her words didn't need help. I sat across from her in a clean office that smelled like coffee and printer paper and told the story like I was reporting an accident. When I slid my laptop around and showed her the screenshot, her expression didn't change much, except for the tiny tightening at the corners of her mouth. "That's bold," she said softly. I let out a humorless laugh. "That's one word for it." Ms. Gable asked questions. Practical ones. Was the account joint? Yes. Did I have records proving my contributions? Yes. Did we have any written agreement? Not formal, but we had texts, emails, conversations about saving for a house. "Okay," she said, tapping her pen once against the desk. "We start with a demand letter." That afternoon, she drafted it. Not an angry letter, not an emotional letter. A legal blade. It stated that the funds in the joint account were designated for a shared purpose that no longer existed, and that his ex-girlfriend had unlawfully withdrawn the full amount without my consent. It demanded the return of my contributed portion, $35,168, within 10 business days, or we would proceed with a lawsuit for conversion and unjust enrichment. It was sent via certified mail to both of them. And for a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, shame would work. It didn't. 10 business days came and went. No check, no apology, no call. Nothing. It was almost impressive, like they truly believed they could take from me and I would just absorb it, like I always had. I called Ms. Gable. "File it," I said. Her voice was steady. "Are you ready for what comes next?" I stared at the screenshot again. The date, the transfer, the number that used to represent hope. "I've been ready," I said. "I just didn't know it until now." She filed the lawsuit. And on the day they were served, my phone finally blew up. His name flashed on my screen. I hadn't heard his voice in months. For a second, my finger hovered over decline. But I answered, because I wanted him to hear something he hadn't heard from me before. Not pleading, not tears, control. He didn't even say hello. He was screaming. "Are you serious? You're suing us? After everything, you're trying to shake us down for money." I held the phone away from my ear for a beat, letting his rage spill into the air like poison. Then I brought it back. I waited until he paused for breath. And in the calmest voice I had ever used with him, I said, "You stole $35,000 from me. This isn't a shakedown. This is me getting my property back." His voice cracked with outrage. "It was a joint account. She had a right." "The court can decide that," I said, each word even. "Talk to your lawyer, not me." And then I hung up. It felt strange, like closing a door and finally hearing the click of the lock. But I didn't get peace, because once they realized they weren't going to intimidate me, they changed tactics. They went public. Mutual friends started calling, confused, cautious, uncomfortable. Apparently, his ex-girlfriend had told people I was bitter and vindictive, that I was trying to extort them because I couldn't handle being left. And my ex-boyfriend, my 5-year partner, didn't correct it. He let the story become a weapon. Neutral friends tried to remain neutral. But neutrality, I learned, is just betrayal with clean hands. I didn't argue with anyone. I didn't write paragraphs. I didn't defend myself with tears. Whenever someone called, I sent one thing. The screenshot. The date. The amount. The proof. And slowly, quietly, you could feel the tide shift. Because feelings can be debated. But facts? Facts are brutal. Faced with a lawsuit they couldn't win or didn't want exposed, they settled. A cashier's check for the full amount arrived at Ms. Gable's office a week later. I got my money back. But when I held that check in my hands, I realized something terrifying. Getting the money back didn't give me back what they'd really taken. They hadn't just stolen my future fund. They had stolen the part of me that used to believe love made people honorable. Months passed after that. I worked. I exercised. I reconnected with the friends who had taken my side without hesitation. I started to breathe again. I started to believe I was moving on. Then, one Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. 3 slow taps. Not urgent. Not accidental. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. Because standing on my doorstep, holding a bottle of wine like they were coming to dinner, were the last 2 people I ever wanted to see again. My ex-boyfriend, and his ex-girlfriend, now his fiancée, smiling nervously, like they hadn't torn my life apart, like they hadn't tried to paint me as the villain, like they hadn't stolen from me and only returned it when forced. And in that moment, I understood something else too. They didn't come here because they felt guilty. They came because they wanted something. For a split second, my instinct screamed at me to slam the door, to shut them out the way I had finally shut them out of my heart. But I didn't. I just stood there, holding the door open, letting the silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. They were dressed casually, but carefully, like people trying to look harmless. His ex-girlfriend stood slightly behind him, her fingers wrapped tightly around the neck of the wine bottle. My ex-boyfriend kept shifting his weight, that old nervous habit I used to find endearing. Now it just looked rehearsed. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked softly. Her voice was gentle, polished, the kind of tone people use when they want to sound reasonable. I stepped aside, not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to see what they thought they could still take from me. They entered my apartment like strangers touring a memory. Their eyes flicked around, noting what had changed, what hadn't. New couch, new plants, same walls that had once heard us laugh. They didn't sit until I gestured. Then they launched into it. A speech. They took turns, like they'd practiced in the car. They talked about how things just happened, how feelings were complicated, how no one had meant to get hurt, how they were sorry for the pain, without ever saying they were sorry for what they'd done. Every sentence was perfectly crafted to avoid responsibility. I nodded occasionally, my face carefully neutral, while inside I felt something click into place. This wasn't an apology. It was damage control. Finally, she lifted her left hand. The diamond caught the light. "We're getting married," she said, smiling wide, eyes searching my face for a reaction. I felt it then, something almost like amusement. Because of course they were. Of course they'd wrapped betrayal in a bow and called it destiny. My ex-boyfriend stepped closer to her, arm sliding around her waist. He looked at me like we were sharing something again, like the years we'd known each other still meant access. "And, he said, clearing his throat, "it would mean a lot to us if you were part of it." I raised an eyebrow. "Part of it how?" He smiled, relieved I hadn't shut him down immediately. "One of my groomsmen," he said, standing with me, showing everyone there's no bad blood, that we're still family. Family. The word hit harder than I expected. They wanted me in photos, in speeches, in the background of their fairy tale. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted absolution. They wanted proof, for themselves and for everyone else, that what they'd done wasn't unforgivable. I looked at them, at their hopeful faces, at the wine bottle still unopened, at the ring that had been bought with a future they'd tried to steal. And I smiled. "Wow," I said softly. "Congratulations." The relief that washed over them was immediate and disgusting. "I'd be honored," I added. She let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. He actually laughed. They stayed another 10 minutes, chatting awkwardly, pretending we were something other than a wreckage site. When they finally left, still smiling, still believing they'd gotten away clean, I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened glass. And for the first time since the breakup, I wasn't shaking. Because somewhere between the lawsuit and that ring flashing in my living room, something had changed. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was watching. The next few months were an exercise in self-control. I played the role they needed me to play. The forgiving ex, the emotionally evolved woman, the proof that everyone could just move on. I went to the engagement party and raised my glass during the toast. I joined the wedding group chat. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I listened while they talked about centerpieces and playlists and color palettes, nodding, like I hadn't once planned a future with him myself. I even went to the bachelor weekend in Vegas. 3 days of forced smiles and shallow conversations. I watched him drink too much. I watched her text constantly, checking in, making sure he behaved. And all the while I listened. Because people who think they've been forgiven get careless. And careless people leave doors open. It was one of those open doors that led me to the truth. Years ago, my ex-boyfriend and I had used a shared cloud account to back up everything. Photos, documents, message history. When we split, I disconnected my devices. But she hadn't disconnected hers. Her phone, messages, backups, even deleted conversations, was still syncing. I noticed it by accident at first. A notification, a file that didn't belong to me. Then I dug. It took a weekend, a quiet apartment, and a piece of data recovery software Ms. Gable had once mentioned offhand. And what I found made my hands tremble, not with pain this time, but with clarity. The messages between them went back almost a year before the breakup. Flirting at first, then secret meetings, then explicit plans. They joked about me, about my routines, my family, my trust. They talked about being together in my apartment while I was at work. Then came the messages from the week of the breakup. Him. Just get it over with. The sooner you break it off, the sooner we can start our real life. Her reply came minutes later. I will. Then we can finally get the money and start fresh. I stared at the words until they burned. The theft wasn't an afterthought. It was part of the plan. Every doubt I'd ever had evaporated. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I took screenshots. I organized everything, dates, times, names, into a clean, chronological timeline. Their affair. Their lies. Their plan. Ironclad. A week later, they asked me for a favor. They were terrible with technology, they said. Could I put together the wedding slideshow? A sweet montage of childhood photos, first dates, happy moments, something emotional. You know us best, my ex-boyfriend said, clapping my shoulder. Make it special. I smiled, and I promised him I would, because I had already decided something. If they wanted a storybook ending, then I would tell the story, just not the one they expected. I took the USB drive they handed me like it was nothing more than a favor between old friends. Hundreds of photos, carefully curated, childhood birthdays, awkward teenage smiles, sunlit vacations, engagement shoots where they looked impossibly happy, like love had erased all consequences. This is everything, his fiancée said brightly, but feel free to add your touch. My touch. I almost laughed. I'll make it beautiful, I said. And I meant it, just not in the way they thought. I bought professional video editing software that night, not because I needed it, but because I wanted control down to the second. Transitions, audio fades, timing precise enough to feel accidental. I worked in silence for weeks. First, I made version A, exactly what they expected. 10 minutes. Soft music, baby pictures dissolving into teenage photos, then into smiling couple shots. Romantic, safe, inoffensive. The kind of thing parents cried over. Then I made version B. That one took longer. It began exactly the same. Same opening song, same baby photos, same gentle nostalgia. I even timed it so the room would relax, so people would lower their guards, so they would believe, for just long enough, that this was another harmless wedding moment. 2 minutes in, the music would fade. Not abruptly, slowly, like something slipping out of tune. The screen would flicker to black. Then white text would appear. The real journey, and then the truth. Screenshot after screenshot, presented cleanly. No commentary, no insults, just their own words. Dates highlighted, names visible. Messages that started flirty and became explicit. Plans made behind my back. Jokes at my expense. And then the financial messages. The proof that they hadn't just fallen in love. They had conspired. The final slide would be the bank transfer. The amount. The date. 2 days after my breakup. And then, just to be polite, just to be complete, the last slide would return to a smiling engagement photo of the two of them. With a single caption, "Congratulations to the happy couple." I didn't feel rage while I worked. I felt steady, like someone finally building something that wouldn't collapse under me. The day of the wedding arrived wrapped in sunshine and expensive flowers. A country club, manicured lawns, white chairs lined up like teeth. Her father had paid for most of it. A kind man, generous, someone who had once hugged me and said he hoped I'd always be part of their family. That thought sat quietly in my chest as I adjusted my dress and pinned on the boutonniere they'd given me. I played my role perfectly. Helped my ex-boyfriend with his tie. Smiled for photos. Walked down the aisle with one of the bridesmaids, arm linked, posture straight. When I stood near the altar and watched them exchange vows, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just distance. At the reception, the room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Toasts were made. Compliments flowed. People talked about fate and soulmates and how everything happens for a reason. Eventually, the DJ announced the slideshow. "They asked someone very special to put this together," he said into the microphone. "Let's give it up." Applause rippled through the room. My ex-boyfriend looked at me and grinned, confident. I took the microphone. "I just want to say," I began, my voice steady, "how happy I am to be here celebrating two people who truly deserve each other." More applause. "They asked me to put together something to show their journey," I continued. "I hope you all enjoy it." I walked to the screen, laptop in hand, and connected the HDMI cable. The lights dimmed. The slideshow began. The first 2 minutes were perfect. Laughter, soft gasps. Her mother dabbed at her eyes. His friends nudged each other, smiling. The couple held hands. Then the music faded. The screen went black. A pause, just long enough to feel strange. Then the words appeared. The real journey. The first screenshot filled the screen. A text from him to her. She's an idiot. She'll never suspect a thing. The room inhaled sharply as one. Before anyone could speak, the next slide appeared. Her reply: I feel a little bad. But then you touch me, and I forget all about her. Whispers rippled, chairs shifted. Someone dropped a fork. Slide after slide followed. Their affair. Their lies. Their jokes. Their plans. I let the pacing do the work. No rush, no mercy. Then came the bank transfer. The amount, bold and undeniable. The date, 2 days after my life fell apart. The last slide appeared. Their smiling engagement photo. Congratulations to the happy couple. And then the music came back on. The same romantic song. Loud. Cheerful. The lights snapped on. Chaos exploded. She screamed high and hysterical. He stood frozen, face drained of color. Her father was on his feet, fists clenched, staring at them like strangers. Guests whispered, shouted, pulled out phones. I calmly unplugged my laptop, closed the case, and walked away. As I passed their table, my ex-boyfriend lunged toward me, shouting my name. Someone grabbed him. I didn't turn around. I walked out through the garden, past the roses, into the cool night air. My phone vibrated in my hand. I didn't look. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away. I wasn't a groomswoman. I wasn't a friend. I was the narrator. And I had just told their story. I didn't stop driving until the city lights thinned and the road opened up in front of me. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing slow, almost peaceful. My phone kept buzzing in the cup holder, lighting up the car in brief, frantic flashes. Missed calls, messages, names I hadn't cared about in months, suddenly desperate for my attention. I didn't check any of them. Not then. Because for the first time since that 3-minute phone call in my car, I wasn't reacting to anything anymore. I had already said everything that mattered. The next morning, the internet did what it always does. Clips from the wedding surfaced, shaky phone videos, half-captured gasps, her scream, his frozen face. The moment her father stood up, rage written all over him. People filled in the blanks quickly. Some tried to argue morality. Others argued legality. A few called me cruel. Most just called it deserved. I didn't comment. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I let the evidence speak, just like it always had. Later that afternoon, I finally checked my messages. My ex-boyfriend had sent dozens. Anger, begging, accusations, then silence. His fiancée, his now ex-fiancée, sent one long paragraph accusing me of ruining her life. I didn't reply. Her father sent a message too. Short, measured. I'm sorry, he wrote. You didn't deserve any of this. I stared at the screen for a long time. That apology, quiet, honest, meant more than all the rehearsed ones combined. I blocked the rest. Weeks passed. The noise faded. Friends who had stayed neutral reached out again, this time awkwardly apologetic. Some relationships healed, some didn't. I didn't chase either outcome, because somewhere along the way, I had learned something important. Closure doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from truth. I took a break from dating, from explaining myself, from trying to be the bigger person. I focused on my life, my real one, the one I almost lost. The savings account I rebuilt wasn't just money anymore. It was a boundary, a reminder, a promise I'd made to myself that I would never again hand my future to someone who treated trust like a convenience. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about that version of me sitting in her car during lunch break, sandwich untouched, smiling at a phone call that was about to end everything. I wished I could reach back and tell her something. Not that it would be okay, but that she would become someone stronger than she ever imagined. I didn't ruin a wedding. I didn't destroy a relationship. I didn't take revenge. I told the truth. And for the first time in a long time, the story ended exactly where it was supposed to, with me walking away.